and good evening. I'm Graham. Welcome to Litquake, San Francisco's literary festival. We're streaming live from the Bay Area tonight, and our festival runs through the 24th. You can find all the details at litquake.org. Tonight we are honored to present The Daily Dose, Feminist Writers Respond to the Climate Emergency. And tonight's event is co-presented by the San Francisco Botanical Garden and with support from the Zellerbach Family Foundation, which has made Litquake Out Loud possible. This is a new curatorial series aimed at highlighting the Bay Area's BIPOC and queer writers and thought leaders. And this is our final Litquake Out Loud event of the festival. This series has been absolutely incredible. You should all go watch all the past events on the Litquake YouTube and Facebook pages. A few quick orders of business before we get started tonight. There is a Q&A function down there at the bottom. You can click that and ask a question at any time. You can also use that just to tell the writers how you're feeling, respond to things, say hi, whatever you want, throw it down there. At the very end of the event tonight, we're also gonna throw a survey at you. When the Zoom screen closes down, a little pop-up's gonna come up, and this is gonna ask you about maybe 5 minutes worth of questions about who you are and how our programming is impacting you. This is essential information for when we approach new donors and when we're applying for grants, so please help us out and fill out a survey. We also ask for your support of the Litquake organization to allow us to bring you these events largely for free. As you probably know, the Bay Area was already a difficult place to be an artist, to have an arts nonprofit, and now things are even more difficult. If you believe in keeping literature a key component of the Bay Area's cultural landscape, please consider dropping us a few dollars. Every little bit helps. We accept donations on Venmo, at Litquake, on PayPal, at info@litquake.org, or directly at litquake.org. One way to support the authors tonight is to buy their books at your local independent bookstore, or you can go on to bookshop.org and find the Litquake bookshelf. We have all the authors' books. If they have one, we have it on there. Now let's get on with the show. I kind of doubt anyone here tonight doesn't believe in climate change. In the Bay, we experience it every single day with power shutoffs, devil winds. We've had the hottest August, the hottest September, and now what may be the hottest October on record. But what matters tonight is that we are hearing about all of this from a fresh, feminist, intersectional perspective. With that said, tonight's Litquake Out Loud has been curated by Aya de León, who directs the Poetry for the People program in the African American Studies Department at UC Berkeley. And her award-winning books include Side Chick Nation and the upcoming A Spy in the Struggle, as well as Aya's first children's chapter book, Equality Girls in the Purple Reflecto Ray. Aya's work has appeared in Ebony, Guernica, Writer's Digest, Bitch Magazine, Vice, The Root, Plowshares, and On Deaf Poetry. She is an alumni of Cave Canem and Vona, and she delivered the 2019 Afro Comic-Con keynote address on Afrofuturism as a call for Black people to join the climate movement and save the future. Now I'm so excited to introduce to you Aya de León.
Hey. Thank you so much. I was really honored to be asked by Litquake to curate for this year. You know, this is a special year. It's been such a challenging year. And for me as a writer, one of the highlights of my year and all of this danger and stress has been this blog, The Daily Dose. That we started back in the spring prior to the pandemic. And when I was asked to curate, you know, this has been the project that's so close to my heart that I really was like, you know, let's get this crew in Litquake to talk about what our experience has been. And some of us are on a listserv for women writers. And for me, I became a climate activist after the 2017 hurricanes in Puerto Rico. I feel like climate change really came home to me as an Afro-Latina, as a Puerto Rican in diaspora. And it suddenly became so urgent that I wanted to figure out how to organize as many parts of my life around climate activism as possible. And one of those was my writing life. And I reached out to this women's listserv, and Elizabeth Stark responded immediately. Elizabeth, I'm gonna read her bio right now. Elizabeth Stark is a queer Jewish writer who co-hosts the podcast StorymakersShow.com and teaches at BookWritingWorld.com and Sonoma County Writers Camp. Her novel Shy Girl was a finalist for the Lambda and Farrow Grumley Awards, and the feature film Lost in the Middle, which she produced, won Best Feature at the 2019 Broad Humor Film Festival and was a festival favorite at Cinema Diverse in Palm Springs. She lives in Sebastopol with her partner, filmmaker Angie Powers, their two 13-year-olds, and Bandit, the dog. So I sort of reached out to this group, and Elizabeth responded, and then brought in another incredible writer in Berkeley whom I also knew, Vijaya Nagarajan, who is the author of Feeding 1,000 Souls, Women, Ritual, and Ecology in India, an exploration of the kolam in India, and that's from Oxford University Press last year. It delves into a women's ritual art and its implications for rituals of generosity. She teaches courses such as Hinduism, climate and the commons, land, water, and air at the University of San Francisco. Selected as a resident for the Mesa Refuge Writing Residency and the Gerasi Writing Residency, she was also awarded the Women's Studies in Religion Fellowship at Harvard University. She is a co-founder and writer on thedailydose.com. Actually, our URL is Daily Dose Deal, because we are the Daily Dose feminist writers for the Green New Deal. And she's been published in the Brick Literary Journal of Toronto, Whole Earth Review publications, among others. And so the three of us were just trying to figure out what we were going to do. And one of the things that we found is that we would write about climate and we weren't sort of sure where to pitch it, what to do with it, where we could get that work published. And so as we were talking about it, I had this thought, because I had been part of this writers group, the Debutante Ball, and folks took turns writing. And it was this sort of, debut writers blog. And I was like, maybe we could try that model. And suddenly it caught fire. Elizabeth was organizing us. We were meeting at Vijaya's house. And then we were like, okay, now we need to invite some other folks in. And one of the folks whom we had bonded over was when I first was talking to Elizabeth about it. She said, I just saw this amazing author. You got to check her out. Mary DeMocker. And Mary DeMocker is the author of The Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution, 100 Ways to Build a Fossil-Free Future, Raise Empowered Kids, and Still Get a Good Night's Sleep. And all the parents in the room were like, oh my God, we need this book. It's an amazing book. It was a 2019 Oregon Book Award finalist that's been recommended on NPR and in the New York Times. DeMocker is the co-founder and former creative director of 350 Eugene, with whom she designed and co-led youth-centered protests featured on PBS NewsHour and in Ava's video shown to world leaders at Paris Climate Talks. So Mary was in the mix. And then I thought of this woman writer whom I had met at the IPPY Awards previously and was like, oh my God, this woman is amazing, because one of the things that we wanted to do was to have a blog that was not only feminist and intersectional, but was largely women of color. And I thought of Susan DeFreitas, who is an American writer of Indo-Guyanese descent. Susan DeFreitas is an author, editor, and book coach committed to social and environmental justice. Her novel Hot Season won a Gold IPPY Award, and her anthology Dispatches from Anaris, a collection of short fiction in tribute to Ursula K. Le Guin, is forthcoming from Forest Avenue Press. So, and then along the way, other folks have joined us. But for me, one of the big things about the Daily Dose was this issue of sort of seizing the means of production as writers. And instead of going around kind of begging other people to publish our climate work, we wanted to just be like, bam, we're putting it out there. And that's what we've been doing since March. So I want to invite Elizabeth to jump in next.
Thank you, Aya. That was fabulous. I just want to talk about our brand being hope, and that was something that we really agreed on right away. And I will say that I grew up in Berkeley. I heard, people speaking about climate change in the 80s and the urgency of not driving anymore. I mean, this was not news to me, but I also grew up with, the threat of nuclear war looming and a sense of what I call the liberal apocalypse. And so I was very resistant to take up the mantle of another, just living under the threat of the end of the world again. And I also felt like people were talking about it around me, but they were talking very calmly, as if the building weren't on fire. And because I live in Sonoma County, pretty soon all the buildings literally were on fire. We were literally fleeing. But the level of conversation still struck me as odd. And one of my dear friends whom I adore, who's a climate activist and scholar, we in a book group mentioned, somebody said, well, what can we do? And this was all a group of women in their 40s and 50s who all had kids and were in no way considering having another kid or even able to. And she said, don't have kids. And I thought, well, that's not really helpful advice. Like, we need, as activists, like, there needs to be something better to say than that. And so that was sort of where I was at when when I sort of said, okay, fine, like, this is real and this is urgent. And I went to see Mary present, and she really has this brand of hope and of here are different things you can do, and you don't have to be somebody who has no other obligations and only endless time and resources in order to be taking daily action. And that was really inspiring to me. And she did happen to speak in Sebastopol one night, and the next night in Berkeley, and Aya zipped down and went as well. So and as soon as I knew I wanted to take action, I knew and Aya had reached out, and I knew Vijaya has, well, you'll get to hear from her, but I just thought these are the women I want to start with. And I knew that, well, actually didn't initially think that writing would be important necessarily. I mean, it's what my passion is and it's what I teach. But I was surprised to see that there weren't as many voices. And I will actually say, I think there are more voices and much more public discourse now than even when we started this in March, that has been rising and rising in public consciousness. So, but I think that's very important. And I think the right wing has often had a lot of different expressions of the urgency, and that it's really important that we on the left also get those voices out there constantly. So anyway, so that and it felt important that we not just drag around feeling depressed, that hope is a strategy, it's a discipline. John Lewis talks about that, Rebecca Solnit, Miriam Kaba. So I think that we just have no right to give up hope. And the last thing I'll say is that my sort of solace in this moment, when all these things seem to be coming to an irrevocable head, is that I want this to happen now, because I don't want to leave this to my kids. I want this to be our problem, and I want to solve it. So I'm glad that we have to look at it right now, and that we have the opportunity to do this together and to take action. So. So should we, Vijaya, do you want to unmute and talk about that?
Hi, I'm Vijaya, and Aya and Elizabeth and the whole panel, and Litquake, thank you for having this panel, and thank you for curating this and making this happen, Aya. I really appreciate it. I've been working in the environmental movement in the US and in India for a couple of decades. And we have a tiny grassroots organization called Recovery of the Commons and Institute for the Study of Natural and Cultural Resources. And so I've been working on the idea of the commons for a long time, and I've been teaching on that as well. But the fires of 2018 just stopped me in my tracks. When Paradise blew up, it was as if something I'd been told, almost since a teenager, that something was going to happen to my grandchildren, or our grandchildren, was happening today. It was like 50 years ahead of schedule, or 80 years ahead of schedule. So it just felt as if there was something we had to, it was a different order of magnitude that we had to do. And so that was something that really woke me up. And I'm a teacher and a writer, so those were the two places, where I wanted to contribute. And what the three questions that I've been really asking myself these last couple of years is, I'm a Hindu by by my background, and how I was raised and what I teach as well. And I've just been, it occurred to me, like, there are 1 billion Hindus, and as diverse as we are in the world, we're 1/8 of the world population. And since I teach Hinduism, the question I've been asking myself almost every day is, what are the capacities and compasses that we can recover as tools within the field of Hinduism that could help 1 billion people reorient their lives and reimagine their lives and re-walk their lives in the present moment, to be able to absorb the facts of science and then to be able to act in response to that. So that's one of the things I've been really thinking about the last couple of years and working on a book. And so what the Daily Dose allowed me to do is really think out loud in public, which I've never done, because as a scholar and as a careful, very slow writer, this was completely a different kind of pace than I'm used to. And so it really kind of forced me to watch the news in a way that I not only had to teach about it, but I had to react as a writer's voice. So it was a challenge every week, every 2 weeks to produce something. And then the other thing I was really thinking a lot about was, how does the concept of the commons of land, water, and air help us understand what we actually need to do? Because I really think, it's about the very perceptions of the world, of what all the multiple worlds that we're actually living in. How do we see that? It's like a paradigm shift, like Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. We are in the midst of the structure of an ecological revolution. And so what might seem like on the periphery has to go into the center very quickly. And then I also, from my own work, from my book, Feeding 1,000 Souls, as I was going on the book tour for 1.5 years, one of the concepts that came out of that book that I've also been working with is the idea of rituals of generosity. How do we transform our habitual rituals of selfishness in a way from our economic capitalist system to really reimagining our lives to rituals of generosity? So I guess that's part of what the Daily Dose has helped me kind of develop a more public voice, which I've always dreamed of doing. And so this was a chance. And initially I have to say, I was like, oh, I have too much on my plate. I can't really do this, even though they were talking about it in my house, I was like, oh, I can't do a weekly thing or, bi-weekly even. But then as they talked about it, I got so excited. I was like, oh, maybe this is exactly what the step I need to take. The next step is what I've dreamed of. So this was really a way for the dream of beginning to experiment really with a kind of writing that I hadn't done. And really the whole discussion of caste that's come up and being able to respond to Black Lives Matter. It's just been an incredibly rich, collective, shared imaginings for me. I can't tell you how that's been. It's just been incredible, really. Incredibly hard and incredibly good. So yeah, thank you. So I think the next person is Mary or Susan, I think.
Yes.
Yes, Mary, yes.
I could listen to you guys talk all night. That's so wonderful. I don't get to see you in person, so this is a great chance to reconnect. And also thank you to Litquake and to Aya for inviting me to be here and to be part of this beautiful circle tonight. I guess I would say that I came to activism actually as a teenager. I was working against the covert war in Central America and El Salvador and Nicaragua, and so that was in my 20s, decades ago, and was in New York City and really doing a lot of travel and a lot of solidarity work. And also, like Elizabeth, I was doing anti-nuclear work and anti-apartheid work. And when then I came out west and I went to music school and I had children. And when I had children, that's when sort of the big aha, we've talked about our different aha moments in this group. And for me, it was in 2007, I was already working on global warming stuff and doing a lot of lifestyle, trying to shrink the carbon footprint. But I found that I couldn't do that and be a good parent and do any kind of political activism. Like, it was kind of one or the other. And I finally realized in 2007, it doesn't really matter how little or much I ride my bike. If, they do this Jordan Cove pipeline in Oregon, that's going to massively expand our state's carbon footprint and accelerate our rush over the climate cliff. So at that point, I decided that I was going to work on system change and not worry so much about what I ate and what I bought for my floors. And so that was a real change in my life. And I started writing. And I also started doing front lawn artwork that you can visit on my website if you want to see some of that, but it was sort of protest with an art focus right on my lawn. And I did that for 4 years straight, while also then starting 350 Eugene, which is a chapter of the International Climate Action Group, 350.org. And we in 350 use the arts and use storytelling and music all the time. And I've stepped back from this to then write a book about this. And I was on this tour when as you mentioned already, Aya and Elizabeth, when I met these wonderful women. And when I was on this tour, it was like a little over a year ago, I think. And I probably said to them, wow, touring is really hard. It takes so much time. How do you write another book? How do you I thought you were sort of done. You put the book out, maybe you promote it for a few months, but wow, no. So I was telling them I don't have much time to write and to really put out new ideas. And Aya said, okay, we got the thing for you. Come and join us. And I was a little bit reluctant, like, okay, I'm already busy and I'm already overwhelmed, but I met everybody at Vijaya's house and it was like, okay, I just fell in love, fine, I'll do it. And then what really struck me was the sense of community, because we as climate writers, as mothers, as women, are so often underfunded, undersupported. And I felt like these are my sisters. And the day that we all happened to be, at least 4 of us in Berkeley the same day, I happened to be on tour and I had 3 public events and I was like, dragging myself in. I was tired and I was running off after a meeting to speak somewhere. And Vijaya was like, well, aren't you going to eat? And I was like, I don't have time to eat. And the next thing I know, she's got this, I'm putting on my shoes and she brings out this beautiful plate of food. And it's all in this little to-go container so I can eat it in my car. And I thought that's exactly what we need as women, as mothers, as writers, is community to sustain us for this kind of work. This is not a sprint, what we're doing with climate justice work and intersectional work, especially now as we watch things crumble around us under Trump. We've got a lot of repair work to do and we have to pace ourselves and we have to link with each other. So that's the beauty for me. One of the many beautiful things about this group is that sense of sisterhood. So thank you, all of you.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it's amazing just to hear everybody's stories with this. I am Susan DeFreitas. And let's just say that my relationship to this issue of whether writing can meaningfully engage with the environmental crisis, if writing can be a form of activism, this is a long-standing issue in my life. I went to an undergraduate institution, Prescott College, dedicated to social justice and environmental justice. And I graduated in the year 2000 when all of my friends who were really serious about making a difference in the world were all up in Seattle protesting the WTO. And I felt like, you know, I'm not an activist. Oh, and then the other half of my friends who really cared were getting into permaculture, right? They were getting into sustainable agriculture. And, you know, I have strong, you know, I have love for both the activist world and for farmers and permaculture, sustainable agriculture people, but I have dedicated my life to fiction, you know, to fiction and poetry. And I felt this intense pressure inside me as a young person, you know, just feeling like, well, what the hell difference is that gonna make? You know, what the distance between somebody reading a novel and changing their mind about some issue in some meaningful way, you know, it seemed so far removed. And you know, I tell my young students when I teach creative writing to young people, you know, that is in fact a lie, because every issue we have in our culture, including the environmental crisis, is because of a story that we're telling ourselves. Our culture is built on a series of stories, right? And even our symbols are stories. You know, there are stories associated with the symbol of the flag. There's a story behind the words manifest destiny. You know, there are all these different ways that stories are embedded in our culture, and stories, you know, are behind all of the issues that we face. But I couldn't see that at that time in my life, right? But you say I went on, I wrote, you know, my first book, you know, which is very much, it's about environmental activists. I've written about the environment in many different ways, but I think I had kind of given up the idea. And I think to this day, I have sort of begun to question the idea of writing as activism, because, you know, I've been paying attention to what Ibram Kendi says and what Boots Riley's been saying about there's a difference between spectacle and going to the halls of power and making of yourself a nuisance and engaging in difficult conversations and actually, you know, pushing till you have an effect. So, you know, has blogging, you know, on this blog, you know, has this had some big effect in the world? You know, there's a point where I'm like, what am I, you know, this is awesome, but what are we doing? But what I found along the way is that there's a big part of what we're doing is bearing witness to what it feels like to be alive right now, you know, and people say, oh, are you just preaching to the choir? Well, as Rebecca Solnit reminds us, the choir gets tired. The choir is under a lot of stress, and Mary, just that sense of community that you were talking about, like, we've given that to each other through this process in bearing witness. You know, we set out just to speak to the Green New Deal in the election year, and we got hit by coronavirus and the Black Lives Matter and all of, you know, everything that has happened this year. And we've been able to roll with it all, bring it all into a common context of hope and our dreams and the community and the world we want to see. And I have the feeling that we've created that for other people that we'll never, ever even meet too. So I'm grateful to have shared in this. And
yes. Yes. I love that. And I just want to say I'm repping today with my Green New Deal shirt, right? And, you know, I think for me, it's what you're saying about that intersection has been really powerful, because we started, you know, that day talking about we want to put the Green New Deal in the center of this, because it's not just about the climate crisis, it's about this big, big solution that we need to be pushing for. And I think, you know, the one other thing that I'll say, you know, as a Black person is the movement for Black lives and this notion of defunding the police is the parallel, right? It's not just about what is wrong, it's about this big solution that's about reallocating our political priorities and our economic priorities and how critical that is. And then one of the things we wanted to do tonight was also to share some work. And I can't remember who was supposed to go first. Am I supposed to go first? It's me. Okay, bam, here we go. So one of the things that, we're doing in this intersectional blog is making connections between things. And so for me, I wanted to make connections, which are not at all hard to make, between 45, the president, and more intimate violence. So this is sort of a excerpted version of the most dangerous election, breaking up with our abuser. Trump is an abuser, which is why we are so triggered right now. Abusers don't take rejection well. The US electorate is getting ready to reject him. We are the woman preparing to leave her batterer the moment when she is most likely to get killed. We know he has a gun, though we're not sure where he keeps it. Karen flirted with him at the club, gave him her number on a dare, went home with him for a lark. Now Karen wants to break up with him. We all do. But he keeps threatening that he won't take no for an answer. He tells his bully bros to stand by. But we know something about abusers. They like to get you alone, isolated, convince you he's doing you a favor. The narcissist is so convinced of his twisted reality, he'll have you thinking you're crazy. He'll have you thinking his win is inevitable, even though nothing else is further from the truth. So we gotta stand together. We don't want you as our president anymore. We never did. Karen never really liked you. She was just drunk on whiteness and looking for trouble. We know he will cheat and steal and lie to keep his hold on us. Now is not the time for us to be ashamed, Karen, to hide our bruises, not the time to pretend this problem will just go away by itself. We need to put the fam on alert. We need to get ready for a showdown. Gather all your friends, join the phone bank, the text bank, visit the swing state, send in your ballot, get your best COVID mask. November 3rd is go time. Hey you, Mr. Abuser, Karen is not your girlfriend anymore. This is not your country anymore. We're gonna change the locks on the White House, gonna put your ass out. Yes, that's the plan, y'all. All right, who's next?
Vijaya? Is it Vijaya or is it me? I'm happy to go. I'll just jump in. That was amazing, Aya, and thank you. And I'm gonna piggyback on what Susan was saying about the importance of the stories we're telling ourselves. And actually, in the questions, Carla has asked about stories as well. And I'm just gonna I write a newsletter for my teaching arm, Book Writing World, and this is just the one I sent out this morning. So it just speaks to this moment, but also to how we construct stories and how that idea of people changing and the world that we're in kind of come together. It's called The Narrative Low Point. In narrative, the low point of the story is sometimes called the all is lost moment. What you do, what you know, what you always know to do won't work, can't work, didn't work. What's next? What do you do now? You really don't know. Your usual strategies, the predictions you make based on your assumptions and experience, none of it works. All of it fails. You are wrong and absolutely existentially uncertain. Know the feeling? There is a way forward. There has to be, because you can't give up. The stakes are too high. What you know to do, what you can imagine, your best guess, inadequate to the task, to the moment. Your only option is to change, to grow, to become someone who can imagine something else, who can pick up a new tool, grow a new understanding, find another way. I am feeling something of this dark night of the soul. Honestly, if anything familiar would do the trick, we could turn away from our fears and even from our hopes and go on as usual. But because we cannot, we must instead reach above our skill level, dream past the boundaries of what we have ever understood, transform into something we didn't know was possible. Feel familiar? If we are some kind of collective protagonist, surely this is our all is lost moment, our dark night of the soul, the moment when everything is stripped from us except the chance to get it right. So that's right now, guys. Let's do it. Vijaya.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes, okay, great. Thank you, Aya and Elizabeth, beautiful. That was wonderful. I've been writing a lot on the notion of collective death, the imagination of a refrigerator, the gift economy, inequalities, the commons, waste, and energy. And so this piece I wrote, I'm just reading an excerpt on September 7th, Monday, September 7th, 2020. And it was 2 days before the orange sky, but it was already getting extremely hot and unbearable. And so I wrote that morning, and it's about going back to September 7th, 1970, New Delhi, India. It was when my family was living in government housing in Netaji Nagar. Daily, early in the morning, just before sunrise, I hear the pipes surging noisily during the 2-hour rationed water time. I clamber off the bamboo mat on the floor, dash swiftly to the kitchen, switch the light on, the bare bulb hanging down from the center of the ceiling, grab the simple earthen clay pot in the left-hand corner and fill it to the brim with fresh water from the single tap nearby in the right-hand corner, and heave the pot, now weighted down with water, back into the left-hand corner without slamming it down too quickly, as I was aware of its delicate nature. It could crack. Amma shouts, "Jaldi, jaldi, Vijaya," before the water stops flowing. I can hear other children in the apartments all around me rushing around, their moms shouting too, urgently but kindly. I run quickly to the bathing room, fill up 2 big gigantic plastic buckets and 2 old brass pots, one after the other, one for each of the 4 of us to bathe with, lean each heaving bucket with small waves rubbing against each other on the gray concrete wall, and then fill up 1 large old brass pot to cook with for the kitchen. Place it near the set-off washing area, and then finally grab the large plastic bucket for the latrine and fill that up with the small water tap. The noisy water pipe suddenly dribbled down to a thin, quiet trickle matched with the ebbing flow. I made it before the moment of exhaustion flowing through the pipes now. I smile in satisfaction. We will all have enough water for the day. Thank you.
I guess this is me now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Those of you out there in internet land, I think at this point you're probably starting to get a sense for the sheer diversity, right, of voices behind this blog. I've found it really both inspiring and intimidating in a certain way, because you know, Aya asked me to be part of this blog, and my general policy is that if Aya asks me to do it, I do, because great things happen when I hang out with Aya. I always meet fabulous people, and just goodness flows into my life. But at the same time, you know, like Vijaya, I'm not a person who rattles off those brilliant think pieces like you just heard Aya do. You know, a fiction takes a long time to cook down. You know, it's like compost, it's got to decompose. But I did, you know, eventually settle on the fact that at different times in my life, especially when life felt really overwhelming, and especially when the news cycle felt overwhelming, I'd settled on a daily poetry practice. And I came back to that in this time in posting to the Daily Dose. And I'm really grateful for the impetus that this blog provided to do that, because holy crap, what a stunning succession of things to bear witness to just in the last 2 months, you know, to have a poem a day. So I haven't shared all that with this group, more refining to do there, but I thought I'd share a series of 3 short poems with you that I have shared to the Daily Dose. This first one's called Endless Summer. I do not care for the arid artifice of overlong sun. Some may. Some may lie the way my Canadian grandmother did, out on the patio with the smoke and a soda, soaking up the sun's rays. Some may lie about the numbers the way dictators do when they want to look better than they are. But these chemical exchanges on high with absolute fidelity are factoring X and Y, and I, for one, prefer the rain to the dead heat of these late days. We're all sunny day real estate down here. We're all into what's hot. Australia, for example, and now California, the Southwest, the Southeast. Drought is the new black. Black is the new white. We're not all that bright, is what I'm saying. And that lucky old sun, just swinging around heaven all day, has finally turned its face our way, as if to say, what is it you're doing down there? And we, for all our dissembling, will soon be hot with shame. When that day comes, we'll be like sunflowers finally, unable to look away. Okay. And now two just dated poems, very recent, right? Poetry of Witness. 9/11/20. Today, I'm sitting on the grease mats of the kitchen where planes are exploding into tall buildings on a TV. Someone has deposited on the cutting board, still wet with prep, tomatoes that bled out 20 years ago or so, it seems. Today, I'm scrolling through my feed, all fire and fury in Portland, Oakland, all up and down the coast. My friends are fleeing, flying, praying in a hotel room somewhere. They have not lost their home. All up and down the coast, my friends are leaving the street for the first time in weeks, huddled indoors, watching the skies for any hint of blue, that apocalyptic red sun shining through. The emergency is always elsewhere until it is not, until it is your turn to decide whether to flee, to seek a cooler clime, a street where the police are polite, perhaps, if you are white, or stand and face the fire. Final poem. 9/14/20. 3 days later. Coming on fall, the West is still on fire, and the country is someone I have not met yet. Cavalcades of oversized trucks with oversized flags that scream, "Don't tread on me," invade the city of my heart. The streets shout back, "I can't breathe," in red spray paint dripping like a crime scene. And I have no idea who we will be to each other come November. But I do know that a 6-month-old right whale died of injuries today, perpetuated by propellers. I know that Opal Creek, Oregon will never be the same. I know that 20,000 oil and gas leases will be sold in the time it takes for me to finish this sentence. And that water spewing from a frack field in southern New Mexico killed all of one woman's livestock. I know that. More deaths are imminent, and I keep trying to figure out how it is that even so, it is the truth, that I am at the center of a living intelligence that is even now knitting bones back together, breaking down the waste of wanton destruction, initiating the great work of repair. Thank you, all of you. Yeah. Now we're going to conclude with at least the set part of our discussion here today with a presentation by Mary DeMocker.
So I would like to share a little bit. This is going to be a little different from what we've been doing for the rest of this talk. And it felt important to me to address you know, here we are, feminist climate writers responding to this emergency. And I felt like, as a feminist right now, I think it's important to keep knitting together the kind of where we are, the pandemic, the racial inequities, and the climate crisis that's sort of underpinning all of it and threatening us all in so many ways. So I actually am just going to give a short little talk, a little slideshow on those connections. So let me share my screen. Okay, just a moment here. Okay, and I'm also going to try to offer some ideas, because that's what I tend to do. I talk about things, I do public speaking, I write articles. My book is basically a list of hundreds of things that you can do to try to mitigate the climate crisis in ways that work for you. So it's a big menu, and so I can't help myself. I'm gonna bring up some issues that affect women worldwide at this point, and then I'm gonna throw a couple of ideas out. So one big obvious connection between the coronavirus pandemic and the climate crisis is it's big, both are big, both affect everybody, and we can't fix it on our own. We're one big interconnected world, and individuals can't fix it, but individuals can, their actions can matter. You can see that with one person who doesn't wear a mask at a wedding and you know, 10 people die. So super spreaders are what I'm thinking about here. In both situations, both crises, science is under attack and people are dying, being given disinformation. And the right wing is really polarizing people politically on both of these crises. Both of them require massive funds to mitigate. And today's the deadline for another stimulus package. We'll see, maybe it's happened or maybe it hasn't. I haven't been on the news, but it's important, and it's important to do it quickly because time is running out and it costs more the longer you wait to face the issues at hand. And this is sort of the heart of what I'd like to talk about is women of color, poor women, families, people of color everywhere on the planet are disproportionately being pushed into poverty by the coronavirus. They're saying 500 million people will be pushed into poverty. And same with the climate crisis, they're predicting that in the next decade, 120 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty by this crisis that has been preventable. So this is, you know, these are staggering numbers. I just want to like, whoa, take a moment to really metabolize the level of human suffering we're talking about with each of these crises. And women are disproportionately the ones that are harmed in both of these. In COVID, you know, I get the New York Times and the parenting section is always talking about, oh, another way women are more impacted financially and their health and more domestic violence that they're not as protected from when we're not in a pandemic, and all these different ways that women and mothers are being really set backwards. And one of the things that has come out is that because women are historically less, you know, employed in terms of good benefits and good sick leave, we are much more likely to be the ones to stay home. We are much more likely to be impacted financially, exposed to the virus, and exposed, like I mentioned, to violence. Similarly, girls, when there's civil unrest, when there are natural disasters that are driven by the climate breaking down, girls' education is cut off, sometimes permanently. And that is a huge impact in countries worldwide where being cut off from education means that you're far more vulnerable to being married off early, to sexual trafficking, and to poverty, and its lifelong impacts. And the tragedy of all this right now is that before the pandemic, there was an estimate that 98 million adolescent girls worldwide were not in school. But with the pandemic, just in the last several months, it's skyrocketed. Another 20 million young women who are locked out of education, and in many ways will be scarred for life. So this is a vicious cycle, and I think it's important to really notice that one of the top tools that we have for mitigating the climate crisis is educating girls and women worldwide. It's a potent tool with multiple benefits for communities, for women's health, family health, for the economy, local economies, and for, of course, local ecology and the climate overall. So I think it's important to look at how there's a negative cycle happening right now with the pandemic and the climate emergency, and especially under Trump, who's not really willing to even talk about the reality of the climate crisis or the impact that the coronavirus has on other people. The awareness around the impact on women is just it's non-existent. And furthermore, he's rolled back EPA rules. So more pollution, which means more health issues, more breathing problems when we're facing a disease that impacts our lungs. And that's especially harmful in communities of color, where more toxic facilities tend to be cited. And it's well documented the ways that communities of color have higher pollution levels that they have to live with. And that shows up a lot in the asthma rates of children. Black kids much more likely to be impacted or to actually die from asthma than their white peers. So, okay, now that I've depressed you with all of this, how bad things are, I want to just focus on the positive that we have completely restructured our society in the last few months and did it quickly in response to a common threat. Now, of course, we could have in the United States restructured a lot more quickly, a lot more respectfully of other people and effectively had we had leadership at the highest levels of government, right? We know that. Still, there's been a huge restructuring of business and in our political life and in our educational lives and in all of our personal lives. And that's not to say that that's positive necessarily, but that it can be done and it can be done quickly. Before coronavirus, I don't know about you, but I did not have 7 masks hanging up by my front door. I had a lot of trips planned, and I don't think I was planning on attending Litquake from my couch here. So I think this is an important focus as we think about and talk about the climate crisis going forward is, hey, everybody, we've had practice. The climate crisis is looming behind the coronavirus crisis, but we've had practice restructuring our lives. And our job is to slash emissions by 45% in the next few years, before 2030. That's a huge, almost overwhelming amount of carbon reduction to happen, but scientists say we can do it. And one of the ways that we can sort of spur each other on is not only do the scientists say we do it, we can do it, it's feasible, we have the technology and resources, but we've also practiced. So just a couple more positive things before I end. This president of ours, this response to the coronavirus is really turning people off. So coronavirus kind of sucks, but the upside is that, hey, maybe he's going to help us, maybe it is going to help us get him out, and we'll have an administration in power that wants to build back better and greener and respects science. 2 more ideas. One is that in the coronavirus crisis, we are asking the younger generation to change their habits, to sacrifice, not only to not spread the disease amongst themselves, but really to protect people who are more vulnerable, and specifically the older generation, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, their aunts and uncles and teachers and neighbors. So this is a huge, I think, point we can bring up with older people who are sometimes loath to make changes or not necessarily very motivated later in life to get active on behalf of present and future generations of children in the climate crisis. So I think that's something that we might gently remind people about, is there are major sacrifices being made by young people right now, our kids, my kids, so many children, for the health and safety of the older generation. And we need to have a reciprocal relationship there between the generations. And the last thing I want to say that's really different between the climate crisis and the coronavirus crisis is that, unlike the COVID crisis, mitigating the climate crisis actually offers all kinds of positive benefits for us, with cleaner air, livable cities, much better health. Imagine the quiet cities, the green cities that we're going to be having. The kids that are going to be so much more relaxed about their own futures. The economy that will be built on clean energy and on more democratic use of our resources and more equity between all people, more representation of and inclusion of all people, of all colors and all abilities, more biodiversity, more energy independence, more resilience in the disasters that are coming. So that's, it's unfortunate that we're going to have more fires, that we're going to have more floods. But the point that we really need to hammer and share with one another is that we have solutions that are going to make us happier, that are going to connect us more to one another, that are going to, and this is sort of the Green New Deal advertisement. If we have something like a Green New Deal, we are looking at, universal income. We're looking at far less income inequality. The staggering, this chasm between the wealthy and the rest of the world is growing with all the systems we have in place right now. So the Green New Deal, or whatever Biden calls it, whatever we get going forward, that's green and that's investing in people and in biodiversity and in clean energy, all of that is going to make us happier people in a better society, poised to go forward and allow our children to be in a thriving world. So that's just my little pep talk for we can do it. All right.
Yes.
Back to you, Aya.
Yes, I love it. And, and y'all can see, like, Mary is just so on point with the presentation. That's why we love having her in the mix. Thank you for framing that so beautifully. And so I think we want to take questions. Yeah. Elizabeth, are you the keeper of the questions? What you got?
They're here in the chat window, and I encourage everybody, if you I think if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A option, and if you open it, you should be able to ask any questions. And we already had a great question, which is, how can I find the Daily Dose? And so just to reiterate what Aya said at the beginning, it's Daily Dose Deal, D-E-A-L, that's the deal. dailydosedeal.com, so that's how everyone can check that out.
As in Green New Deal, yes.
Woohoo!
There you go.
And so I'm encouraging folks to put in questions. Also, I would be really curious where in the world people are. So if people just want to say hi in the Q&A, that's great. So I'll read the question, and anybody who wants can pop in. So Carla says, first, I love the idea of what we do and believe is constructed around the stories we tell ourselves. In what ways can our writing challenge the dominant narrative, both in what we say and how we say it? What do you see as trends right now in writing about climate justice, and what gives you your greatest writing inspiration? So the stuff about writing.
I can respond to that, at least initially, because I've kind of dedicated a lot of my a lot of time to thinking about this, working as an editor and a book coach, really specializing in, dedicated to helping people tell stories that do challenge the toxic narratives in our culture, and also supporting people from historically marginalized backgrounds in breaking into publishing. And I want to just say that there's a huge range of ways to engage in this issue with your writing, just the way that there are a huge range of ways to engage in the work, the great work necessary, of meeting the challenge of climate change and creating sustainable solutions. but just speaking from the point of view of fiction, just speaking in terms of fiction, because that is an area, it's in my wheelhouse, you know. All the way from one side of the spectrum, you know, we have folks, you know, centering in their stories, you know, the lives of people fighting for a just and sustainable world. You know, we saw Richard Powers doing that in The Over story, you know, and doing something also somewhat revolutionary in his polyphonic, you know, community narrative, right? So not only are those stories, is that book dedicated to the fight to save forests, it's told in a community narrative, which sort of subverts the idea of the one dominant protagonist, right? So that's one example. But even if you're not centering, you know, the climate struggle in your work, you know, necessarily, you know, look at the ways you're dealing with power dynamics between characters. You know, look at the way that you're not only including voices from historically marginalized communities, characters, etc., but that the power dynamics between your characters adequately reflects the real challenges that we all face and the differences in the level of privilege between your different characters. All these things are tied together. And again, just saying that there's explicit and implicit ways, both, to challenge these toxic narratives in our culture.
Awesome. Anyone else? Yeah, Mary.
That's great. I love hearing your response, Susan. As a fiction writer, because I'm not a fiction writer, and I'm always fired up to I guess to give people something to do, you know, to give them a list. And I guess I would say that if you are writing about the climate or about injustice, really about anything that's problematic, I think it's important to give people something to hold on to, something to do. And so much of what's happening now is the stories that I'm hearing a lot in my activism work is that people feel hopeless, or they feel that, you know, they're too distracted and busy, or they're really just focused on the now. They don't want the negative thinking, but mostly it's that people feel like we're doomed. And it's really a self-fulfilling thing if we tell each other a lot of these dystopian stories that fill up, you know, Netflix and the bookshelves and the games out there. There's so much dystopia. And I would just throw it out to anybody. I challenge you, tell us a story about the future you want to live in, or the story that your children or grandkids want to live in, and then tell us how to get there. Mm-hmm. Because we already know about the future that we don't want. We're kind of headed there. So how do we reverse course in ways that help us stay connected to one another? That's the challenge I want to see. So that's what I try to do, is tell stories, connect with people, and then give them one positive thing that they can do, at least one positive thing to do on whatever the thing is I'm telling a story about.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you know, for me also as a fiction writer, I write stories about groups of people who take on difficult fights and win, you know, and you know, it's hard because like the happy ending is considered like cheesy and, you know, like not sophisticated. You know, we've been quoting Rebecca Solnit tonight. What is it she says? She says like, despair is the black leather jacket that looks cool on everybody. You know, I'm misquoting her terribly, but you get the idea, right? And that like being really hopeful and like, come on guys, we can fight and win, like is considered just uncool and unsophisticated. And yet, I loved that piece you read, Elizabeth, because that, you know, when I gave the keynote at Afro Comic Con, you know, I've been going for a couple of years, and it's like you have all of these like Black sci-fi fantasy folks, and the climate crisis is like a science fiction fantasy story. Like you have like the big technology and we're headed towards dystopia. You can say, you know, it's like, and it is that moment, you know, I think about it in terms of the hero's journey, right? The reluctant heroes, you know, this like moment of despair, and like this is the place where people are like, all hope is lost, you know, the crew has broken up, and this is a place where people find it within themselves to fight anyway. You know, like you said, everything we've tried hasn't worked, but this, and you know, they say that these stories have been present in every culture, you know, for thousands of years. And I choose to believe that we've been telling ourselves these stories so we could be ready for this moment. We could be almost inoculated, like, oh, the feeling of hopelessness. Didn't they predict that? We feel hopeless, but yet we're going to act anyway. And I'll just say for myself, you know, here I am like, daily dose, rah, rah, rah. You know, I do all this peer counseling. All hope is not lost. People can band together. So like, I'm generally pretty hopeful about these things, but like 60 days for the election, I hit the wall, you know, and I was just feeling so overwhelmed and so hopeless. And it was like, I couldn't do the things that I had always done. I could always write my way out of hopelessness. Well, I couldn't, you know, and what I had to start doing was I had to start text banking. Like it was like the usual activism that I did wasn't direct enough, wasn't specific enough. And the thing that I've found since I've been text banking for the election is suddenly I'm surrounded on Zoom with hundreds and thousands of people who I don't know, who are all doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. And it doesn't require all this special intelligence on my part, you know? I'm not like brilliantly composing the text that will that will move the needle. I'm pressing send 1,000 times on these prefab texts because somebody else has actually done research that this is the kind of thing that moves things in voting. And, you know, I'll be participating with folks and they'll be like, we sent out 50,000 texts tonight. And it's been so interesting, this piece of actually moving out of writing as activism and continuing to do my writing, but also moving into more direct activism. And I'll just say, I've been texting with the Working Families Party and Resistance Labs, and I've been shocked at how easy it is and how accessible it is. And I just want to encourage folks to think about like hope in practice and hope as action, you know, and it's not just about me sitting here by myself in my house feeling hopeful or writing and talking to other writers, but it's also been really important for the election in particular to get active and just keep thinking about, you know, what else I can do. Another thing I'll just say that's my thing, my most recent blog on the Daily Dose was about like, you know, 45, I prefer not to say his name. You know, he's not going to win. He can't win. He could steal, but he can't win. And it's really important. This is where I think language matters, that, you know, because there actually aren't enough people in the country who can vote, who like him and want him to continue to be in power and will vote for him. Now, that, you know, voter suppression is real, violence is real, danger is real, the danger is real. And the people who have been mentoring me around electoral activism are saying, just do everything that you can. In spite of his unpopularity, you know, there are lots of things stacked against us in terms of voter suppression and conservative folks in the judiciary who in any kind of contested election would not go on the side of justice. But yeah, but I think it's important. And the other thing is, as people are talking about and threatening a general strike, if 45 does not accept an outcome that he doesn't like, it's important to know that it's really not ever about a win, that we as a people need to fight prior to the election, during the election, and after the election, and that actually we do have the power to win. It's just that we are not used to having to defend our democracy. We're not that well organized around it as folks are in some countries, but we're getting organized. And I'm excited if you look at Sunrise Movement and other folks, they're doing mass calls to talk about what do we need to do to defend this election. So I'll say writing is wonderful, but it's also been really important for me to also take kind of direct voter action because, you know, at this point, as a Green New Deal person, I will say that Biden is definitely our best hope at the executive level in this nation to move this project forward.
That's great, beautiful, Aya. I just wanted to add a few writing recommendations as well. You know, Amitav Ghosh has written a beautiful novel that just came out last year called Gun Island, which I think is a hopeful fictional imagination of how to shift the climate you know, movement to the where we need to go. And then he also has some other novels, Sea of Poppies, River of Smoke, and Flood of Fire, which the last two remind me in a way of what we are in, even though they're about the past. And The Great Derangement, which is also really wonderful about the imagination. And I guess for me, I think the key thing I guess I keep going back to is the commons. You know, I mean, and that's where Mary's slideshow is also really helpful, because the commons is the word almost that connects both the coronavirus and climate. So, you know, how do we recover a language that has been erased and shifted underground of that which we share together? Because unless we have a language to even name that which connects all of us, we can't figure our way through the morass, you know, of the other thickening language that has developed over the last 500 to 700 years. And it's not about going back to the past, but about reinventing the commons for the future. So I think that's what I guess I'm, and then just my life, I feel like, you know, the last 50 years, I've seen so many small groups of people in the environmental movement who've gathered, and starting with 4 or 5 people. And in 5 years, you know, they're saving the rainforest. They're, you know, there's incredible shifts that can happen from a group of 4 to a group of millions and billions. That's what we need. So I think I feel, of course, down and depressed and like everybody, but then at times I can also feel very hopeful about just the changes that I have seen in the last 50 years and what I hope to see in the next 50 years and be a part of.
We are coming to the end. We've gotten a lot of appreciation in the Q&A, and I also I just wanted to piggyback on what Aya was saying about how much story prepares us for these moments that, and that Lisa Cron in Wired for Story talks specifically about why it is that among all the survival skills we have the ability to get lost in story. How can that be a survival skill on an evolutionary level? And she, you know, and she looks at neurology and she says, because it teaches us what to do, and if we always learn the hard way, we're not going to make it through. So this is really important. So lots of wonderful thanks from Lisa in LA, and Nita and her husband are in Marin, and Carla asked a question, and just thanks to everybody for showing up. And we're committed to going daily through the election, and we're not sure what's happening next, but we are always looking for BIPOC queer folks to lend their voices. So yeah, reach out to us.
I just want to say thank you so much, guys, for your words and your hopefulness. I love that piece, Aya, just about hope as action and hope as practice, and not just hope as sitting alone in your apartment. I love that.
And so many of us are sitting alone in their apartments.
I know. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, dailydosedeal.com. Come check out all of these writers, what they're doing. This is a great project and we're all for it. And we have just a couple more days left of the festival. We're going to the 24th. You can find all the details at litquake.org. And if you enjoyed this and you want to share it, we're going to have recordings up at the Litquake YouTube and Facebook pages. So get the word out there and vote. But thank you so much, guys, and good night.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Litquake. Thank you, Daily Dose Writers.
To everyone.
Good night.
Yeah.